Up books. Pascal, can we move on to yourself? And this, maybe you can play second fiddle here to, sorry, Jason. Let's talk about, well, a potentially dirty word, ICOs. It was a buzzword back in 2017, not so anymore. All right, we've seen some success, however, with these new variants, the initial exchange offerings this year. Some limited projects. Could you, Jason, just enlighten us a little, just what you see as the key difference between an ICO and an IEO?
So they're very similar in sort of macro levels. They both generally have a private sales phase, a public sales phase, and then in the case of ICOs anyways, that's followed by a listing. In the case of an IEO, essentially the same mechanism that's used to run what would normally be termed an ICO is essentially used to list the token. So the token is immediately listed on an exchange. Whereas with an ICO, a lot of times you have a period where the ICO is finished, but the token hasn't quite been listed, so it's not liquid. With an IEO, you're sort of guaranteed that liquidity because you know pretty much as soon as the IEO is through, that token will be listed and it'll be available for purchase and obviously for sale. So there is sort of that additional benefit, and I think overall it does seem like the way to move forward because to some extent the exchange basically vets the crypto project, which is something that you don't really see. You don't see a lot of vetting in ICOs, and that's really one of the major problems. So I think ultimately, if the crypto exchanges are able to get good enough at vetting these projects, as opposed to just taking out anyone that comes up to them, they're essentially putting their name behind these projects, and ultimately you'll have just a few exchanges that are able to successfully pull off IEOs just because they have such a good reputation. So to some extent, the industry did sort of need some degree of gatekeeping, where at least somebody would vet these projects before they became, before the general mass could invest in them. I think IEOs sort of fill that gap that we were seeing before.
Jason, just based on your understanding, the IEOs, or Pascal, you can jump in here if you like as well. So ICOs always had the pre-round, the pre-funding, where the VCs could come in and take first dibs. Is that still in effect here with the IEOs?
Yeah, sure. Most IEOs are raising funds privately. In fact, that sort of helps them to have a better shot at the IEO itself. But Pascal, maybe you can jump in here.
Well, again, the IAO are saying that obviously they provide more transparency, more liquidity, and more safety. I think that's been their ball game all along. But to what you said, Jason, as well, I think when you look at all the exchanges that are taking on those projects and their vetting, I don't really think that we could leave the due diligence to exchanges to some extent. If you look at the news and if you look at some of the scrutiny that even the big exchanges are under right now, I think we have to scratch, like I said, behind our head to say, well, the exchange, so to speak, is the best way to vet a project. I think common sense is always the best way to vet any.
Some great ones. We're going to stay on this angle with regards to IEOs, ICOs, and most of the assets that have been sold in these initial exchange offerings so far, they are above offering price. At the same time, however, they're in the red when compared with when they have been traded on the actual exchange itself. Does it suggest that they've been used just purely for speculation as opposed to the utility? Jason, what's your thinking on this?
So I think overall you need to realize that they're mostly dealing with startups, and startups do have a much higher failure rate in general than a lot of other companies. And I don't think that this is, if you look at like 98%, or even if something like all but the top 20 cryptocurrencies essentially fail, I don't think that would be outside of the realm of what would be statistically expected, or at least somewhat statistically expected for startup companies. So I think to a large extent, the sector gets like a bad name when really it's not that different. I mean, why don't you just say, hey, let's not invest in our companies, because the majority of those end up being failures. Why invest in smartwatches? Because the vast majority, we know that Pebble, for example, failed. So it's sort of odd to hold crypto to a higher standard. On my second point, I don't believe that we're going to see a huge revival of ICOs. I'm not saying that they won't come back more so than they are now, because now they don't hardly exist. But I don't think that you're going to have a huge influx on them. Certainly not more so than 2017, specifically because I think regulations are going to come in and make a lot of what was possible in 2017 not even possible, right now. And I think when it comes down to that, yeah, sure, it's great if you can do your own research. Everybody is encouraged to do their own research, but the fact is, the vast majority of people. This is a retail market still. It's not an institutional investor market, and retail investors are fairly hype-driven. So you really can't expect them to really do their research, or it's not really realistic. It'll end up coming down to having a few good exchanges sort of being gatekeepers. And yeah, as Pascal pointed out, there are problems with exchanges sort of accepting any offer that comes to them. But that is sort of the thing that will start paring down as some of these start failing. I mean, people are going to think twice about the exchanges that they thought vetted them. So there has to be having some vetting is useful, particularly from an exchange. I don't disagree that doing your own research can mitigate some of that. But the fact, one of the big pluses of an IEO versus an ICO is, with an ICO, you're not 100% sure when that token is going to get listed, so you don't really know whether you have that liquidity. However, with an IEO, you're guaranteed that liquidity. You're guaranteed it's going to get listed. So that's, I think, a huge plus for many people that are choosing to go with IEOs, both from a perspective of a company raising money, but also from a perspective of people deciding what they want to invest in. Again, they're utility tokens, so this would not be a traditional investment, but that's basically how people would be looking at it.
Sure. Jason, just your final thought on this area, and yourself afterwards, Pascal, if possible. To any blockchain startup founder at the moment, wondering how they're going to get their development funds, should they hold on, wait for regulation, see how it's going to work, or go the ICO-IEO route?
So I would say it's not a good idea to wait for regulation. I think regulation has rarely come in and solved a whole bunch of things. Generally, it's just a start for more regulation and more iterations of that. I think that a company that's planning on launching, if they've got a product, they've got a team that they're proud of, they should just take it to market ASAP. I would almost suggest that doing an ICO right now is practically useless, just because they've just had such a poor success rate lately. I would sort of, if it was a startup fund, I would probably recommend that they spend time raising money privately first, then spend some time building out the product, because again, they need a significantly decent product if they're going to do anything close to an IEO in 2019. And then probably my recommendation would be to go for an IEO as opposed to an ICO. I'm not disagreeing that you can have an ICO that has KYC, AML, all these sort of safeguards built in, but the fact that it becomes immediately listed, I think, is a huge plus for a lot of investors.
So bootstrap it first, prove their mettle, and then go forward for higher funding.